Hey there, pre-AP. We're going to continue our plant unit with part 4 and 5 on this video. I made a previous video on parts 1 through 3, so if you're looking at for parts 1 through 3, you're going to have to go to another video. But let's start with point 4. Part 4 of outline 8.6. We're going to talk about gymnosperms in part 4, and then in part 5 we're going to talk about good old angiosperms. So here we go. Alright, so part 4, we're going to talk about gymnosperms. So, adaptations for drier, cooler environments. These are the environments that gymnosperms are going to live in. We need to know there are some characteristics about gymnosperms, like reduced size and leaves, which means that these are things like pine needles. So let's highlight that. They have a thick, waxy cuticle on their leaves to help shed water. And their leaves remain all year, hence the term evergreen. And they shed a little bit at a time, kind of like a dog sheds its hair. They are larger plants with thick bark. And they have cones for reproduction. They have female cones, which are really large, and they contain the seeds. And then there are smaller male cones, and they contain the pollen granules. Pollen is actually sperm cells, those gamete cells. And their seeds are carried by the wind, so highlight that. And also it blows the pollen by the wind to the female cones. The cones are fertilized, and then the seeds will be later dispersed. Alright, so gymnosperms, they are technically called naked seed plants because they produce with cones. Another word for gymnosperms are called conifers because they reproduce with cones. And there are 4 types of gymnosperms. So again, they have thick, kind of boxy bark. They have male cones that are very small, and that fuzzy stuff all over them is pollen. That's what pollen looks like under an electron microscope. Pollen is so small that it can't be seen really well, its molecular structure, till you put it under an electron microscope. Female cones. These are mainly at the top of the tree. So usually whenever people see pine cones that are on the ground, they've already lost their seeds and they have died. And that's what their seeds look like. They are mainly dispersed by the wind. They have a little tail on them, kind of like a helicopter, and they fly through the air until they find nice soil, and then they'll grow. Remember, these are conifers. This picture is a conifer called a ginkgo tree, or Ginkgoaceae, Ginkgo bibliotheca is its scientific name, and it is really famous. People like to put these in courtyards or in their backyards or front yards because of their funny, cute little fan-shaped leaf. Alright, so let's talk about our types of good old gymnosperms. So that was Ginkgophyta that I just showed you. There's only one species that exists, so please highlight it, Ginkgo biloba. And why? It's got an oriental fan-shaped leaf, and it turns this really pretty bright yellow in the fall. That's another reason why people love them. Our second type are called Cicadophyta. These possess a large cone, and they're in the center of palm trees. So this is palm trees. And why people like palm trees? Because it reminds them of the beach and tropical areas, and they're pretty to look at. Gnetophyta. These are things, they live in extreme desert plants, so you're not going to go to the, to some type of greenhouse and go buy one, because they won't live around here. And one of the more well-known ones is called Awilwitchewa, which is grown in Africa. It has gigantic leaves. And then you have something called a Ephira or Ephedra. And what it does is it produces epinephrine, which is mainly found in diet pills. That's why we mention it. And these actually turn into tumbleweeds after they die. So have you ever heard of a tumbleweed? They actually tumble like a ball rolling down a hill, and that's how they disperse their seeds. And then Carnifera Phyta, these are the ones that really do have true cones. And they have two types of cones again. Female cones, they are large and wide, so please highlight that. And then male cones, those are long, narrow, and they are yellow. Why are they yellow? Because they carry the pollen. Alright, so evergreen needles. You've seen pine needles before. They are very thin because we want to reduce water loss because we've got to keep them up all year. And then they have a very thick, waxy cuticle on the outside so that they can shed that water so they can stay alive all year. And also, if you've ever noticed anything about pine trees, they have this thick, sticky sap to keep the animals from eating the plant. So sap is actually used to make this stuff called turpentine. Go look up turpentine. See what it's used for. Alright, that's it for part 4. Let's move on to part 5. We're going into angiosperms, which are, remember, those are the ones that are flowering plants. So let's highlight that. They are flowering plants. They are seed-producing vascular plants. So kind of go over what vascular means. They have xylem. So adaptations that they have are things that help them live a long time. They have xylem tissue that transports more water to the leaves. And what this means is more water leads to larger leaves, which means we're going to perform more photosynthesis. We're going to possess more sugar in our broad, flat leaves than those thin, kind of waxy needles. We also have flowers, so please highlight. Flowers are a specialized shoot. Remember, shoot means stem. And flowers are pretty much there to attract pollinators, like bees and birds, like hummingbirds, and possibly bats. Alright, so let's talk about the parts of a flower, because we're going to dissect flowers. So let's talk about this. If you want to draw this flower, or just, I would draw this flower. I would. Just put it off somewhere. So there are, depending on what type of flower you are, you can be a perfect flower like this one, and you contain male and female reproductive organs, or you could be an imperfect flower, where you either are a male flower or a female flower. If you are a perfect flower, where you have both reproductive organs, you don't have to worry about pollinators so much. If you're an imperfect flower, you're going to need a pollinator. So let's highlight. Flowers have 4 circles of specialized modified leaves. You have sepals right here. These are actually the little leaves. You have petals. Petals are there to attract those pollinators. They are a color attractant leaf. So petals are actually a specialized leaf. You have your male reproductive organs, which is the stamen. The stamen is made up of the anther that actually holds the pollen, and then the filament, which is just the stalk that holds the anther. So let's highlight stamen, site of pollen grains. These are male. Anther, part with the yellow pollen grains. Filament, supportive stalk. The pollinator, like the bee, the butterfly, the hummingbird, they are to transport the pollen grains. If we go to the female parts of the flower, the whole collective part is called the carpel, or sometimes people call it a pistil. So highlight, that's the female. You have the stigma, which is sticky. Then you have the style, which is the long neck. And then you have the ovule, which is the ovary. That ovary put out beside there is going to turn into a fruit. So if you've ever eaten fruit, you've eaten a plant ovary. So let's move on to fruit. Alright, so fruit. Highlight that all fruit is a ripened ovary. It is developed to promote seed dispersal by animals eating it. That's the only reason why angiosperms create fruit. We can highlight that green fruit is unripened hard fruit, sour, no sugar. Another one wants to eat that. Colored fruit is ripened, soft, usually is scented. It's sweet tasting because it has lots of sugar. We need to highlight that after fertilization, the ovary walls will thicken and it will start building fruit around that seed, because all a seed is, that sperm and that egg that came together, and we're going to create a new plant. So fruit structures for seed dispersal. There are many different types of fruit. There are simple fruit, aggregate fruit, and multiple fruit. So, some examples of some mobile fruit, or fruit structures for seed dispersal. Let's highlight those. There are kites. Those are for, so I'm going to make a new slide. So kites, those are put out beside there. Those are maple. Helicopters. And then you have things called burrs, like the chestnut tree. So put out beside there, chestnut for burrs. What it has these pokey little spikes all over it. And unlike those kites where they're just going to be carried by the wind, those burrs have those pokey little spikes so that they can stick to the fur of animals and be taken from one place to another. And then we have our biggest category that most people like to talk about is our edible fruits. So please highlight those edible ones, or the animal digestive tract weakens the seed coat. So whenever that animal excretes the seeds through its digestive tract at the end of the road and fecal material, that plant that is in that side of that seed is going to be planted somewhere in the soil, and the plant will be able to grow. So let's go back to my fruit picture. Alright, so types of edible fruit, simple. Put our examples out beside there. Those are the ones with a pit, like a peach or a cherry. Has a single ovary, one flower. So please highlight that. Possesses one ovary, put out beside there, one flower. If you're an aggregate fruit, these are things like raspberries, blackberries. Please highlight that there is one flower but several carpels, which means there's going to be several seeds inside those little bitty kind of tough little bumps that you find inside of those. Those are all the seeds. And then there's multiple, like a pineapple. It has many ovaries, many clusters of flowers. Every one of those dots on that pineapple, if it would have been left on the tree or before that fruit was produced, it was a flower. That's why it's called multiple. And then like that chestnut, it is called a dry fruit. Examples would be pecans. So dry fruit examples, pecans, walnuts. Just to name a few. Now we're moving on to double fertilization. So how this works is that there's a pollen tube right here, and the sperm will travel down the pollen tube, and then this is called, one of them is going to dig a path for the other two sperm to come in and fertilize this ovary, the egg inside that ovary. And then what will happen is after the other two enter through that small pore that the first one dug out for them, one of those fertilizes the egg and the other one makes a polar body. We talked about those in meiosis. And then after that you form cotyledons, which are embryonic leaves, and which we'll get into that with monocots and dicots. If you have one cotyledon, one leaf, highlight you're a monocot. If you end up having two baby leaves, cotyledons, you are a dicot. Alright, so types of angiosperms. Please highlight there are over 200,000 species. They make up 90% of all plants. Awesome sauce. So, there are called basal angiosperms. We don't really talk about those. Magnoliids, which are magnolias. They are actually evergreens like angiosperms, but we call them an angiosperm because they produce flowers. Monocots and dicots, sometimes called eudicots. So monocots, they usually have an odd number of leaves. And then dicots or eudicots, they have a different number of leaves. They have a different number of cotyledons. Remember, monocots have one cotyledon and dicots have two cotyledons. So the last thing that I need you to do is kind of put and write this down somewhere, either on your outline or on another piece of paper, is you need to know this for whenever we dissect flowers. Go ahead, write down. You don't have to draw the pictures per se, but you need to write this information down, the difference between monocots and dicots, so you're ready. The last thing we need to highlight is angiosperm plant uses. We use angiosperms mainly for food and medicines, and we also use them for decorating and perfumes. Alright, so you can pause the video and copy down your monocot versus dicot chart, and I will see y'all tomorrow. I hope that was helpful, guys.